All right. Awesome. Great, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session, and we're really excited today that we have some attendees from this year, some from last year, and also some guests from other places who are interested in computational social science in general. And today's event is Fireside Chat with Professor Matt Salganik, and the moderator will be our Chief of Staff for SICSS-Taiwan, Cecilia Liu. And my name is Robin Lee. I'm the lead organizer for SICSS-Taiwan. And just to give folks who aren't part of the SICSS-Taiwan 2022 a quick introduction of what this event is. So this event is actually one part of the 2-week workshop. So this is the day 3 of the 2-week program. And the mission of this summer school, SICSS, is to foster collaboration and build bridges for communication between social science and data science. Matt Salganik has been founder and a key organizer since the initial inception of this event. And this summer school has expanded to multiple sites, multiple countries in the world throughout the past few years. And this is the 2nd year in Taiwan that we're able to host this. And part of the additional mission for SICSS-Taiwan team is really to make data science and coding more accessible. Because we believe that as we reimagine who are involved in creating and applying machine learning and artificial intelligence in our society will be more just, more transparent, and more civil. So this is some introduction for kind of the broader picture of where we are. And I'd like to introduce our guest today. Matt Salganik is Professor of Sociology at Princeton University. He's also affiliated with many research center, interdisciplinary research centers, including Center for Information Technology Policy, Center for Statistics and Machine Learning. His research interests span computational social science and social network. He's the author of Bit by Bit. So many of us who are part of SICSS, we have been reading this book, this wonderful book, and listening to Matt's lectures over the past, I would say past month or so at least. And he's an outstanding researcher, and I won't read all of it. But on top of these achievements, he also has been a encouraging and supportive mentor, and I can really speak from personal experience during my highs and lows during my grad school so far. And our moderator today, Cecilia, is also an outstanding person. She's the Chief of Staff and Finance Chair of the program this year. And interestingly, her degree is not in sociology nor in data science. Rather, she received her JD degree from University of Pennsylvania Law School, and she practiced law in both US and Taiwan. Previously, she was a transaction lawyer in New York and Taipei, and she's passionate about gender inequality in STEM fields and passionate about making more girls and women to join the tech space. She actually has been making the career transition since last year, learning Python, learning R, learning SQL. And this year, she's successfully transitioned into a new career as the technology program manager in a law firm. I'm not sure if I got the title right, but I think I should got the gist of it. So it is my honor to now pass the mic to both Cecilia and Matt.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you so much for your kind word, and I wanted to welcome Professor Salganik to join us. I think, like Robin mentioned, we're so excited to have you to have this side chat with us. We're so curious about, you have a lot of really great experience and really looking forward to share. So I think Robin kind of briefly mentioned about Professor Salganik's kind of the background. I knew that you kind of started an undergrad in Emory as I believe, major in mathematics, and then you went on to Cornell to receive your PhD in sociology, and then you started teaching at Princeton, I believe, since 2007. So I wonder if you can give maybe kind of a overview about how you get into this very newly developed kind of field of computational social science. How's your journey?
Sure, of course. Thank you so much for the question. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I'm looking forward to speaking with you. So I should start also by saying that I think everyone will have to find their own journey. Everyone's journey will be different, but I can tell you a little bit about mine. As you mentioned, I started off, it's very indirect and has many twists and turns. So I started off majoring in math. And then towards the end of that, I was getting tired of proving things about things that don't exist. And so I liked math, it was neat, but it felt a little bit like just a big game. And so I thought I want to do something that combines math with the world more. And so I thought about statistics, which seems like a good hybrid of these two. But I wasn't sure if I really wanted to study statistics. My university didn't have many statistics courses at the time. And so I decided to work for a while as a statistician. And so my first job was as a statistician for the US Census Bureau. And so they're like the National Statistical Office. And so I worked there for 2 years, and I decided that I did not want to go to graduate school in statistics. But actually, I realize now what I was doing as a 22-year-old at the Census Bureau had very little to do with what I would be doing as a graduate student in statistics, but I did not know that at the time. So then I thought, okay, I want to go to graduate school. I don't want to go to graduate school in statistics, but I still like this idea of math combined with the world. And so I ended up going to graduate school in sociology. And sociology to me felt like a good combination of those two things. And sociology also felt exciting because it allows you to study almost anything that you want if it involves people. And you can use almost any method you want. So you can use machine learning, you can use in-depth interviews, you can use computer simulations, you can do historical analysis, basically anything involving people. And so I started grad school in sociology. I started at Cornell for 2 years. Then I went and studied abroad for a year in Holland. Then instead of going back to Cornell, I went to Columbia to work with my dissertation advisor. And I was at Columbia for 4 years. And then I came to Princeton, and then I've been here ever since, with the exception that I like to do sabbaticals, where I get to go different kinds of places. So I did a sabbatical as a professor in residence at the New York Times. That's actually where I first met Robin. I also did a sabbatical at Microsoft Research. And I also did a sabbatical at Cornell Tech, which is a new Cornell campus in Manhattan that is very oriented towards engineering. So I've gotten a chance to be in a lot of different environments, which I found to be very fun and rewarding.
Yeah, that sounds I think it sounds really exciting, and I'm very curious because you mentioned, I think the sociology, you're exactly right. It's a very interesting discipline in a way that, pretty much everything related to kind of human, you can count into sociology. Is there any particular reason that you ended up kind of heading towards computational social science? Is it because of your math background? And if that's the case, how do you kind of build up your coding ability? Because I think that's probably something a lot of our participants would be curious, how you kind of cultivate that ability along the way.
Sure. So how did I end up doing this? I think a lot of it was luck and timing. So when I was in grad school, I was working with Duncan Watts, and I think he was one of the first people to really notice the potential for the digital age, or I guess what we now think of as big data, but at the time that name didn't exist, to change the way we do social science. And so that was one of the reasons I was very excited about working with him. And so when I got to grad school, he was working on an online project with Peter Dodds and Robi Mohammed about the electronic small world experiment. And so I got to watch them do that, and that got me really excited about the potential for doing new forms of data collection online. I should also mention, so that kind of led into my dissertation, which was an online experiment about music, where we made a website where people could come and download new music. But a key part of that also was that my advisor, Duncan, had the infrastructure to support this kind of new work. So we had a full-time web developer in our research group. His name is Peter Housel, and we couldn't have done the research without him. So a lot of it is being in the right place at the right time, around the right people who can give you the kind of support and infrastructure that you would need for your research. So you mentioned particularly about coding. I'm still learning to code. In fact, what I was doing yesterday was profiling some code to try to speed it up and learning about the intricacies of how R handles certain things. So I think learning to code is an ongoing effort. I try to view it as a fun thing. Like, one way to think about it is it's very frustrating. Like, oh man, I spent 4 hours and I just did this very simple thing. I try not to think of it that way. I try to think of it much more as a process of discovery and of problem solving and of creation, in the sense that if you look at that code that I've been working on, that I was doing this profiling of, like, I think of that as like a thing that I've created that has certain trade-offs, it has certain design. I made certain choices, other people could make different choices. And so I like to think of coding as like a expressive, artistic kind of thing. It still is slow and it's still frustrating, but I think when it's framed that way, it can help make it seem more enjoyable, the process that you're going through.
Yeah, I mean, I think as maybe a coder, as a beginner myself, I completely understand what you meant, because I think especially maybe at the beginning stage, which I'm still in right now, if the focus is, oh, I wanted to get through all those materials and I want to be good within this time frame, I found it really easy to be discouraged, because you feel like it's taking so much time than I expected, and then maybe I wasn't making the progress as much as I wanted. So I think this is really an encouraging note maybe to share with a lot of our attendees who, was very accomplished researchers in their original disciplines, but kind of new to the coding field. So thank you for that note. And I think that actually brings us into the next question very well, is I think a lot of our attendees are our program attendee this year of SICSS-Taiwan. So everyone is very familiar with our mission, which is, hoping to bridge the data science and social science in terms of their research together. And I'm very curious what's kind of the motivation that drives you to basically kind of co-found SICSS with Professor Chris Bell, and because I understand organizing events itself isn't easy, let alone to do that in an organization. Can you maybe share your experience, how what's the motivation and what's the process, and then kind of the parts that enjoy?
Sure, absolutely. But I want to pick up on first something you said, which is the difficulty of organizing one of these things. And so I hope all of the participants can take a minute and give your organizing team a round of applause to thank them for all the work they've done. It is not easy, and you can talk to them and learn from them a little bit about some of the things that go on behind the scenes to make a great learning experience. So I guess, why did we start SICSS? Around that time in 2017, there were a lot of people interested in learning about computational social science, but there were relatively few places to learn about it. At that time, it was mainly maybe a few university-side classes in the whole world, and there weren't really any books. And Chris and I had both taught computational social science classes at our own university, but we realized there were many more people who wanted to learn this. we also were approached by the Russell Sage Foundation, which is a foundation here in the United States, and they have a tradition and they support social science research. And they have a tradition of running 2-week summer schools on different topics. And they approached Chris and I about starting a 2-week summer school about computational social science. This was also right around the time that Bit by Bit was coming out. And so I thought that would be a good way to combine Bit by Bit with this new activity. So a lot of times when I take on a new project, I look for ways that it can overlap or support my existing projects. And so we ran the first Summer Institute in 2017 here at Princeton. We had space for 30 participants, and we ended up with more than 300 applications, about 300 applications. And so we felt actually really bad not rejecting so many really strong candidates. And it kind of felt strange that we were creating this program to provide access, and then we ended up only admitting a small fraction of the qualified applicants. So we decided to live stream the events the first year. And very quickly, like a few days in, we realized that the actual lectures are really only a small part of the program. A lot of the program is in the interaction with your peers. And we realized that that wasn't being provided to people on the live stream. And so we thought about how can we create this same experience that people get from being together in a group on a bigger scale. And then one of our guest speakers, Deborah Estrin, we were chatting with her about this problem, and she said, why don't you start partner locations? And so we said, oh, that's a great idea. But do you think anyone would want to do this? We had no idea. So we had to figure out how to start these partner locations. And we said, anyone who's done the program with us, they can start a partner location at, let's say, their university, their home university. And so then in the first year, we had about 7 partner locations. And then the next year, we had about 11. And then it continued to grow. We had a big dip during the first year of COVID. Then it's continued to go up since then. And so I guess it's a little bit like my career path in that there were many twists and turns. When we started this, we certainly had no idea what it would become. But as new things happened, we adjusted to them, and it ended up the way it ended up. And I'm really happy about that. Also, I should say, I'm very grateful to Chris that Chris is now the leader of the entire SICSS effort. I've now stepped back and I'm serving on an advisory board, and Chris has continued to do it. So this year was my first year in 5 years not organizing SICSS, and there were some nice things about that. And so I want to just briefly mention those before I talk about the nice things from SICSS, because if this is about your career, I also think it's important to remember that your career is a part of your life. And so, for example, during SICSS, for 5 years, I missed my kid's last day of school. So when I was a kid, my parents used to pick me up from the last day of school and take me out to get ice cream. And I remember this like tradition. And when my oldest son was in kindergarten, that's what I started to do. Then I started SICSS, and I could not do this because SICSS was happening right at the time that my kid's school ended. So this year was the first year in a long time I was able to do that. Also, SICSS is right around the time of Father's Day in the US, which is a day that people celebrate their fathers. Usually I was not able to participate in that as much as I would like because of SICSS. So there's just like many trade-offs that come with doing these things, and I think I was happy to make those trade-offs for some time, but I don't think I want to make those trade-offs for the rest of my life. And so I like to try to find a balance where, yeah, you can do this for a few years, and then you can stop doing it and do something else for a few years. And so trying to find that balance. But so that's what I like about not doing SICSS is having more time to be with my kids. what I like about doing SICSS and what I miss the most about doing SICSS is, I think, two things. One is learning from the participants. Like, SICSS is really a tremendous learning experience for the organizers because we get to meet all of you. And so as the field is changing very quickly, as new ideas are happening all over the place, the chance to meet 30 young people who are engaged in this is a tremendous learning experience. Second thing I actually miss is the application review. Now this may seem totally crazy because the application review, as your organizer will tell you, is very difficult and time consuming, but it's also a great learning experience. So doing application review for 5 years, I felt like I had a great sense of what people in the field were working on in a way that I couldn't get in any other sense. And so sometimes people would say, like, what are young people in computational social science interested in? And I felt like I had a really good answer to that question. And I feel like I will have a worse answer to that question over time as I get more and more disengaged from the application review process.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are just several points that I believe all of the organizers of our team can really resonate with. I think we all spend quite a bit of time into this event because we just think it's so valuable to our attendees as well as to myself. I think probably particularly to myself, because like Robin mentioned, I kind of came from a sort of bizarre background as a lawyer. And for me, it was a great path to really learn, I guess, what data science really is. I feel bad to tell everyone before I joined SICSS, I don't really know what data science is or even coding is about. But after this program, I'm fairly confident that I can speak knowledgeably about this field. So I think that's tremendous value to myself and my personal growth. And I think one thing you mentioned, I really think it was a very important point I would like to share to our all attendees, because I think we put together a very good program, kind of taking everyone through the process of learning maybe coding and certain important topics, very hot topics in the computational social sciences now. But I think, Matt, you mentioned about the collaboration and really get to know each other. I think it's actually the key. And then I think that's why I think for our program this year in Taiwan, we decided to have at the end of the last 3 days, still have an in-person kind of gathering so we can have the opportunity for all our participants to meet. I think it's very easy and convenient if the participants can just attend from your own bedroom. That's the temptation I think we have so far. But maybe you can share a little bit, how you see other participants or in different locations in your prior experience that really successfully kind of collaborate. Because I think when we're reviewing our applicants, we did make a genuine effort trying to balance the amount of participant in terms of maybe generally in data science and then maybe in more social science focused fields. But if you can share a few words how you see that collaboration can actually work, I think that would give us a good idea, how they can kind of proceed in a way.
Sure. So just one question of clarification first. Will you all be doing kind of group research projects with the speed dating in the second week?
Yeah.
Okay. So I've seen a lot of those projects. I want to say something about those projects and then about collaboration more generally. Interdisciplinary collaboration more generally. So first about those projects. It is very hard to do a project in a week. It is even harder to do a project in a week with people that you do not know. It is even harder to do a week in a project with people you don't know who are from different fields than you're from. And even harder if you're not in the same place physically. So it's a very, very difficult thing that you're attempting to do. And so I would encourage you to again, not focus so much on the destination, the goal, but focus more on the process. Just like with coding, if you think of coding as an expressive, artistic thing that you are performing and doing, it's enjoyable, more enjoyable, even if it's a struggle, than if you think about it as, I have to get this thing done as quickly as possible. And so with your projects, my guess is that you will spend a lot of time not understanding each other. Talking to someone from a different discipline can be very confusing. So like Cecilia, you have background as a lawyer. I don't have a background as a lawyer. If we tried to do a research project together, you might use some legal terms or legal concepts legal terms that I don't understand. So then a way to deal with that is just ask, right? Like, oh, you mentioned a search warrant. What does a search warrant mean? And then you could tell me what it means. But the harder thing is there's like entire invisible parts of how we think that other people don't share, who don't have our disciplinary training. So I think a lot of what you learn in grad school is a certain style of thinking, a way of approaching problems. And that is actually becomes so internalized, it's very hard for you to even know that you have it. So to me, it's a little bit like an accent. So I say, I don't have any accent. Other people have accents, but obviously everyone else thinks that the way they speak is free of an accent. So everyone has an accent, everyone has a point of view, and it's almost invisible and hard for you to see. And so I think one of the most valuable things is for you to become more aware of that invisible structure. And that happens the most through these kinds of discussions, long discussions. It will go on for a long time for you to finally get a sense of what you've been like assuming implicitly, or what someone else is assuming implicitly. So I think it can be quite difficult, but an incredibly valuable learning experience. I think many people found that just the process of collaborating with someone from a different field was the most valuable thing about the project, even though the project never went anywhere. So that would be, I guess, some thoughts about collaborating on this project. Then in general, interdisciplinary collaboration, to me, this is very exciting. I love this process of talking to people from different fields and going through this pain of not understanding each other, and then eventually understanding each other. And I feel like the payoffs to that can be really, really big. It's challenging there's career challenges about, how do we publish things that are interdisciplinary and so on. But I think many of those are addressable. I think a bigger challenge is finding the right people to collaborate with. That's almost the hardest thing. And so this again goes back to being in the right place at the right time, somehow finding a way to find the right community for you to collaborate in.
Yeah, absolutely. I very much agree with what you just said, because I think for me, the process itself, I think I work with our team pretty closely, but particularly Robin. And I can definitely see what you mentioned about the graduate school training. I guess for us, it's kind of lawyer training. And then I think benefiting from the fact that I get to talk to Robin so much about this project. So we totally see how we think things. I think Robin is very creative and then very able to kind of provide different solutions, whereas I think in a way, the lawyer training is very to structure frameworks. I always like to start from what is the framework do we have? What's the existing picture we're in? And I think for Robin is very much kind of outside of the box, and then see if there's any creative way we can achieve solutions. So I think that's very valuable, but only able to achieve by talking to each other and really work with each other very closely. So I think that's really a great point for maybe all our participants this year to know that you only get to know other people by talking to them and working with them. So it's really, I think, a role you probably have to take pretty proactively and benefit
Absolutely.
from this structure.
And I want to add also, you can learn a lot from doing things that are not talking about work. Like that sets the stage for having useful conversations about work. So at SICSS, a lot of what in the in-person events, everyone eats their meals together, breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 2 weeks. And like a lot of really valuable conversation happens over the meals when people are not really kind of talking about work, but not really. And that also sets the stage for people to feel comfortable enough with each other that they can really ask them, like, what do you mean? Like, if I've had lunch with you for 3 days in a row, Cecilia, and then you say something about law that I don't understand, I would feel comfortable asking you about it, or saying, why is that important to you? Why is that interesting to you? I don't understand that. And then, like, I think those kinds of deeper conversations are really supported by having meals together and being friendly with each other. And at some of the other SICSS locations, people would play soccer together, or go on walks together, or go to a bar together. All of these things, I think, are very helpful.
Yeah, that's really great to know. I hope that toward the end of our program, some of our attendees hopefully can be able to find the people they have, initial relationship, and then just kind of use this as an opportunity to kind of further, right? I think that's kind of our intention here, is provide an opportunity for you to know people from other fields. And then I did not know how incredibly hard it is until I joined SICSS, because I remember I actually go back to my LinkedIn and I check all the LinkedIn friends I have on my LinkedIn profile, and I would say maybe 95% are lawyers. So I would strongly encourage everyone to go out of your own field and then expand kind of your network, and then hopefully you can find some collaboration at work and life as well. I think I wanted to ask the last question before we move on to the next topic is, I think for SICSS, you see, your initial project kind of grow beyond Princeton, beyond the United States, and now it's a global, at a global scale. We can see how much innovation this program brought to the rest of the world. Do you have any advice for people? I think some of our attendees are early professors or even tenured professors, and then they might have certain vision they wanted to implement and then wanted to kind of go outside of the framework that the university provided. Do you have any kind of maybe advice for people who are thinking about doing it?
About running a SICSS location, or in general creating new programs?
Yeah, in general.
Yeah, it's hard work, is one piece of advice, but it's very rewarding. I think one of the things that we did that worked really well was coming up with a way that other people could take ownership over the programs. So one of the main decisions that we had to make when we created the partner locations was how much control we should have over them. And so initially, actually, some people used the word satellite location, and we very strongly pushed back against satellite location and wanted partner location. And the idea was that we would provide materials. These people would then take those materials and do whatever they wanted. So some partner location sites had themes, like there was one that was in a law school in the Netherlands. Others had a theme about doing social good. None of that stuff was things that we ever anticipated, and ended up making the program much more successful than if we had tried to say, here is the thing that you need to do, follow these steps exactly. So we had some concern about that from some of our funders. They said, well, how do you know it's going to happen in a good way at these partner locations if you're not like controlling it? And I said, we're not trying to make a McDonald's where you go in and it's the exact same food everywhere in the world. We want it to be different everywhere in the world, because the world's all different and people are all different and what they want is different. And I think we tried to then establish some kind of core principles, and then within those principles, let people innovate and let people do the kinds of things they want. And I think that encouraged other people to get involved. And I think having other people become involved is the key thing that you need if you want to have something grow.
Yeah, I think that's very true, because I think for SICSS-Taiwan this year, what we're trying to do a little bit different is we decided to reach out to our sister sites kind of in Asia Pacific. So we had the opportunity to talk to the organizers of the SICSS in Japan, Korea, Indonesia, and other couple of places. And then I think it's very true, like you said, each country has their own different challenge when they are dealing with data science. You know, for example, I think when we were talking to Japan, one thing they're very curious is how to use maybe data to solve their aging problem. I think that's something very much in their mind. For Korea, we surprisingly found out that they share a lot of similarities in terms of the structure, you know, how the STEM education is in place and the gender difference and stuff like that. And I think for Indonesia, they're such a multi-language country. So when they're doing kind of the text analysis, it's very difficult for them to do because they have so many different official languages. So I think I found it very fascinating to do. And I agree with you. I think if it's a McDonald's chain kind of approach, probably wouldn't have, you know, so many different sparks. So that's really, really good to know about that. So I think we would just move on to your experience about, I think you mentioned you have the sabbatical experience in New York Times. I know that you wrote an article with Robin on, you know, when you're a professor in residence, you kind of observe New York Times, how they moderate their comments and the potential bias. As you mentioned, you also spent some time in Microsoft and in Cornell Tech, which I know it was actually, I think, a campus in the Roosevelt Island in Manhattan. Yes. They have both the business school and the law school, I believe, for the tech programs in Roosevelt Island. So maybe if you can generally give us a little bit kind of intro about your experience, and then how, or maybe the fundamental question we're interested is, how do you decided to start your, or have your sabbatical years in those institutions? Because if I understand correctly, which I can't really say I'm an expert, is you usually do sabbaticals perhaps in a different country for a foreign university. That sounds like something that's more common for people to do. So that sounds very interesting to us. Can you tell us a little bit more, Ed?
Sure. So the way the sabbatical system works here at Princeton, it varies, I guess, from university to university, but every certain number of years, we have time off that we can then go somewhere else if we want. Our system, we also have a system where there's a tenure. So you come for 6 years, and then there's like a vote. And if you pass this vote, then you can stay forever. And if you don't pass this vote, then you have to leave. So before this vote, before I had tenure, I actually did all of my sabbaticals right here. I stayed in my office in Princeton. I didn't go anywhere. After I had my tenure, though, then I had the opportunity to think longer term and explore more. I think with each of the sabbaticals has a different story, but one underlying theme is community. Remember, I keep saying a lot of it is about who you're around, who you're talking to, what environments you're in. I love my department. I love being there, but I already have spent a lot of time there. I've spent now almost 15 years at Princeton. And so for me, the chance to go somewhere else is really, really, really valuable, because there's a certain kind of thing that you can learn only from being in a new community, having lunch with people, going through the whole kind of immersion in a new place. And so to me, that's very exciting. I was particularly excited to go to Microsoft because one is they have some of the best computational social scientists, I think, especially in the New York lab, which is where I was. And it was wonderful to see how research could be organized in a different way. So at Microsoft Research, they do amazing research. And in some ways, it's a lot like a university. but in other ways, it's very different than a university. And then just being in that environment helped me see, like, universities aren't the only way to organize research. Just give a concrete example. Universities are organized into departments. And so in my department, the Department of Sociology, everyone is trained in the same way. Most of us have PhD in sociology, but we all work on very different problems. So some of my colleagues study education, some study crime, and so on. At Microsoft Research, it was very different, which is we were all working on very similar problems, but we all had very different training. And this made for a very different environment, a much more stimulating environment, because your colleagues are all interested in the same things you are, but they all have different kinds of training, and much like SICSS. And so seeing that, like, the world can be organized in a different way, I think is very powerful. And I really enjoyed my experience at Microsoft Research. I learned a lot from my colleagues there. Cornell Tech was very similar. At that time, it was almost like a startup university. It was very small, and they organized themselves very differently. And the people who were there were very different than the people I normally interact with, so that was great. The New York Times was, again, very, very different. And each of those things gave me a chance to really be in a new place and learn new things. I guess one other thing I want to say is also why those three places, it's also all three of them are commutable from Princeton. So I have kids, my wife has a job. We can't, like, move to Paris for the year as much as I would like to move to Paris for the year. And so all of these sabbaticals were available without us having to move, which to me is also a very important thing. And so I'm very lucky that I live close enough to New York that I can commute to New York, and there's many, many, many opportunities in New York.
I see. So it's a result of both great, interesting experience as well as maybe practical factors as well.
Of course.
Yeah. It kind of occurred to me one question, and I'm very curious to hear your thoughts, as I attended a kind of a speak panel a few weeks ago, and then we have one of the panelists who was I guess a researcher. So he received his PhD degree I believe from Georgetown, and then he has done a research job in Twitter, and he decided to take the job in academia after he received his PhD degree. So the panel, I guess the audience asked him, kind of his experience, and then he said, in Twitter, when you're doing a research, usually because it's a for-profit company, you need to have a business case. That's usually why you decided to put so much resources into solving one question. And I'm curious from your sabbatical experience working in those, maybe not so much about Cornell Tech, it's educational institutions, but for Microsoft and the New York Times, how do you find that experience different than, I guess, being a professor? I think you briefly mentioned that the way they work are different, but in terms of the problems that you or they are trying to solve, do you feel like there's more appealing in some ways or not? I'm just curious about your perspective on that.
So at Microsoft Research, I found that to be almost the same as a university. The way they don't tell you what to do, they give you a lot of freedom. The way that they handle that, though, is they only hire people who are doing work that they're interested in. And so they say, if we hire you, then we want you to keep doing what you're doing. And if we don't want you to keep doing what you're doing, then we won't hire you. And I think that is a good system. At the New York Times, it was very different. They don't really do research in the kind of academic model. In some ways, though, journalism has some similarities to academic research. So one of our 6 participants from a few years ago was, prior to being a graduate student, was a journalist, and he said, yeah, it's the same thing. You're just learning things and telling other people about them. And the difference is that academics spend a lot of time learning about the thing and then often put very little effort into explaining it to other people. Journalists spend less time learning and often much more effort and craft into how to explain it. Also, journalists have to communicate with a much larger audience than academics. So initially when I was at the New York Times, one of my first thoughts was, oh, I'll do some kind of research here that looks like the kind of academic research that I'm used to, and I can try to publish a paper. And then I very quickly realized that it's not really an environment that's set up for that kind of work. So again, remember I talked about the infrastructure that you need, the people around you that you need, the environment you need to do research. The New York Times is not set up like that. It's not set up like Princeton. It's set up like the New York Times. It's set up to put out a good newspaper, be a good journalistic organization. And so, to give an example, the project that Robin and I worked on with the comment moderation, if you wanted to write a paper about that, that would have required a certain level of instrumentation of their system, a level of record keeping that is really not necessary for a newspaper, but would be necessary for a research project. And so they often didn't have that. And they were also hesitant about making there's certain kind of changes that we could have made that would have been interesting for research. And they said, like, hey, we have to put out a newspaper, we have to be doing this comment moderation basically all the time. And so what happens if we try to do your little experiment and it breaks? And then you're like, yeah, that's a problem. And then, or what happens if we can't just like do an experiment? Like, how would that impact our users? It's just very complicated because it's a real system. It's not like a lab experiment where we bring people into a room and we can control that environment totally. So I think the goal of that sabbatical was not for me to go there and do research like I would do at Princeton, because Princeton is already like a university that has infrastructure to do research. I wanted to go there, and then over time I gradually started to like embrace what it meant to be at the New York Times, and so try to do projects on their time scale, go to meetings and observe and participate and not really do research. And again, not research in the kind of academic sense that leads to a publication, but still doing research in the sense of learning about the world, being part of teams, trying to solve problems. And so I feel like I learned a lot from that experience, even that none of that stuff ended up in papers. Just to give a concrete example, I had the fortune of observing all of the data science team meetings at the New York Times. And they were led by someone named Chris Wiggins, and he has a certain style for running a data science meeting. And now when I run my research group meetings, I use the Chris Wiggins style. And so it's not, I didn't learn like a new theorem, I didn't learn a new, publish a paper, but like learning about how to run a team, how to communicate, how to make hard decisions. All of these things were really helpful when I was there.
If you don't mind me asking, what's the style?
It's not that fancy. So his style is slightly different than my style. So the way he does it is everyone comes and then he randomizes the order of people. And there's about 10 people on the team. He has like a random number generator, and then they kind of go in random order talking about what they're doing. And then he keeps notes the entire time while people are talking. And the notes are projected on a big screen. So everyone can see the notes. And also everyone can also see what he types. So if someone says, I worked on this and I did A, B, and C, and I found out that option C worked better, he would sometimes, depending on how he summarized it in the notes, he was signaling what he thought was important and what he thought was not important, which I thought was interesting. Also, then the meetings were all self-documenting because he's taking the notes as the meetings are going. And then sometimes we'd be like, oh, what happened when this came up 2 weeks ago? And you can just look back at the notes and see. So I definitely do much more documentation as I go, in part because of this experience with Chris. Because the idea that you're going to document it at the end or separately, that doesn't really work for me. So you got to do the documentation while you go.
Yeah,
I would say one other stylistic difference that I see that I think many of your participants could think about is it was most clear to me when I gave a talk at LinkedIn. So I gave a talk at LinkedIn about 5 years ago about a project I was working on. And in the way that I had set up the project, I set it up in a way that was going to be very generalizable, that allowed you to add in extensions and improvements over time, and in a way that I thought made sense from first principles. And someone at LinkedIn said, oh, why did you do that? You could just do this other thing and you'd probably get like 90% the same answer. And this other thing was like, in my opinion, inelegant, not generalizable, not from first principles. But I agree with the person that it would probably give you about the same answer almost every time. And so I was like really offended at this person. Like, why would I not set it up in this general, extensible first principles way? And then I realized that, that had cost me an extra several months, maybe years, at least maybe a year to set it up in this other way, because to set it up in the other way required solving some much harder problems. And like, I think it depends how much you enjoy the amount of extra work to get that little bit. So if you enjoy setting it up from first principles in a very generalizable, extensible way, and you're willing to spend an extra year to do that, then I think you would like being in academia more than in industry. If that sounds awful to you when you could just get 90% in 10 minutes, then I think industry seems like a better fit for you. And neither one is right or wrong. Like, it is true that, like, in some ways, the way I did it was very wasteful. And I'm okay with that. That's fine. But it's not that one way is better than the other. It's just they're different. Some people like one more than the other. And so it's important to finding your right community.
Is it fair to say it's a more result-oriented approach?
I would say result-oriented and to put it in a more positive way, practical and efficient. Like, I generally don't, this is maybe a limitation of my own work, I generally don't think about how long things are going to take or how much they're going to cost. And obviously, like at the New York Times, that came up a lot in the meetings I was in. Like, if you were considering, let's say, 3 different approaches, Chris would often ask, okay, how long is that going to take? And that was a key factor. It's not right or wrong, it's just different.
Yeah, I can totally see the difference. I guess kind of from my own experience in more kind of general, the industry, time, resources is usually the 2 top criteria when you're evaluating if you have to do something. And then I think the best way is the shortest to cut with least effort. Usually that's the case. So that sounds like a reflection of her experience as well. I think we have a little bit more time, so I think I would just kind of turn into maybe the last question. And then sorry if we put it on the spot to kind of ask you to predict the future, but I guess for some of our attendee, computational social science is, I would say, relatively new in Asia, and I think there's definitely more developments in the States, in the US. I'm curious from your, I'm sure you're kind of like at this higher position to tell us the development. Do you see how computational social science would evolve? And then I think we also have one question from our member is for people maybe from more computer science background, if they're interested in studying social questions by using the computational method, in addition to just being the hand of the people, the researchers who are sociologists, is there any way for them to engage in the project by themselves, or do you feel like the only way probably is have to work with someone?
Okay, let me talk about that collaboration question first. That is a great question. I think the first model of collaboration that many people think of when they think of a social scientist and a data scientist collaborating is, or maybe this is the first model that many social scientists think of, is the social scientist tells the data scientist what to do, and the data scientist does it. And so I've heard many, some of my colleagues say, oh, I'm looking for a collaborator to, let's say, write a web scraper to pull down a bunch of websites and process them and do these kinds of calculations. And then what I say to my colleagues is, no, you're not looking for a collaborator, you're looking for a research assistant. And I think for computer scientists who want to work with social scientists, one thing is you could become like someone's research assistant for a little while, but then make it clear to them that you're doing this in the hopes that you will learn about how to do more of the research yourself. And so often when you have like an apprenticeship model where you say, I will do this work, but while I'm doing it, I want you to be training me in how you're thinking about these things, why you're making the decisions you're making, and then over time, this will become more like a collaboration, even if it starts like a research assistant. So that's one model. Another model is potentially to look for problems that require computer science and social science expertise. So to give a concrete example, I have a paper that I worked on with a computer scientist, Arvind Narayanan, and this was a paper about privacy and ethics in the Fragile Families Challenge. And so some of this involved core computer science ideas that he knows better than me. Some of it involved domain expertise about social science in this data set that I knew better than him and we knew better than him. Also, the other authors of this paper were Ian Lundberg and Karen Levy. And so finding things where the complementary expertise is necessary. These are generally that's generally a harder approach because there aren't as many research problems that require this kind of dual expertise, but they do exist. And so those are two kinds of models for how to do more of this collaboration. I would also emphasize that for computer scientists who want to do more of this collaboration, I think an important thing is being open to the fact that social scientists care about different things than you. And so some of the collaborations I've seen not work well because the computer scientist said, oh, look, I can make this code run faster, I can change this, and look how efficient this is. That's often not very relevant to the social scientist. And so just keeping in mind that when you're collaborating, your colleagues may have different goals than you, and that's fine. And the best way is obviously if you all can have an alignment in your goals. The last question is about the future. I don't know. I can tell you that I am going on sabbatical now, and I will be working at the Institute for Advanced Study here at Princeton, another sabbatical that I can do that will not require me to move. And I'm going to be working on a book about the future and predicting the future. So if any of you are interested in this book, if you send me an email, then I will send you an update once the book is finished, which could be several years. So don't hold your breath. But one of the things that I like to do when I'm thinking about a new project, especially a long one, is to start trying to see what kinds of things people are interested in on that topic. And so if I get a lot of people writing me emails saying, please let me know when your book is ready, or here's what I'm interested in about prediction, this is helpful for me. So I think predicting is very hard, as I learned during the Fragile Families Challenge. I think I don't know a lot about Asia and the way universities are set up in Asia, but I can say what I saw in the evolution in the United States, and how I think that may play out other places. And so I think initially what we now think of as computational social science, or let me take a step back. What we thought of as computational social science in 2017, a lot of that is now called sociology, political science, psychology. Like a lot of the techniques, data sources are moving into the core of the discipline. And I think that is great. That is a long-term, in my opinion, success for computational social science, for it to become normal. So really computational social science is just social science, right? I mean, that's how I think of it. Or if you're a data scientist, you might think it's really just data science, but it still feels new. And so what I think will happen is there will be this kind of frontier of computational social science that will continue to move. And so like what is covered in SICSS 10 years from now, if we are lucky enough to have SICSS in 10 years, will be very different than what's done at SICSS today. But a lot of what's done at SICSS today, 10 years from now, will just become a normal part of the training that people receive in graduate school. And so I like to think of it as this always moving frontier combined with always moving normalization and integration with the larger disciplines. And I think the integration with the larger disciplines are really key, because that's the only way we're going to make real progress, is if lots of people receive training in this, if it receives tight integration with existing approaches in the social science. That's how I think is going to make the most interesting computational social science. So that's my own view. Other people advocate for something like creating new departments for computational social science, treating it as its own distinct thing. I personally prefer a model of this continuing frontier with the continuing normalization.
Yeah, that's really helpful to know. And I can just add one quick note before we wrap up. I think I would personally say, I think legal industry itself is probably one of the most conservative, and then probably in terms of technology is very dinosaur age. I can say that from my own experience. But I think even now in the legal industry, people are starting to be aware we should try to have more data-driven, even the partners know, the data-driven approach to analyze the aspects of different operations and in business. So yeah, I think that's really, an exciting journey. I call it as a journey, and I think our participants are kind of the pioneer in this field, particularly probably in Taiwan, when this is really something very new. And then we want to thank you so much for your time and for your participation. I'll let Robin to kind of wrap up the event for us today.
Thank you, Cecilia. Thank you, Matt. And I believe that now that all the participants can testify that Matt is truly a very genuine and passionate person, that not only you want to hear his talk, his research talk, but also just hear his personal take on many things in general. So with that, I want to just briefly advertise our event next Tuesday, Taiwan time at 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. It is an Asia Pacific International Panel. We have invited 5 organizers from across the Asia Pacific, including Taiwan, Singapore, Korea, Indonesia, and Australia. So we have folks joining from background from computer science, information study, in digital cultures, in education, as well as communication. So they were going to share more about kind of the challenges of running SICSS across different countries and kind of what they observe as the cross cultural barriers. And so again, that event is open for anyone, regardless of the registration or part of the SICSS attendee, because we think that since we're organizing it and we're preparing for the questions, we should open up for many people who are broadly interested in computational social science. So I have posted out the link in the chat already. Yeah, but otherwise, thank you for your time to join this event from across the world, and wish you have a good evening or a good morning.
Yeah, and then we will share the ask everyone the email so we can be part of the the great project that Matt is going to work on.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Cecilia, and all the participants. Please join me again in thanking Robin and Cecilia for organizing such a great event.
Thank you. Great to have the chat, and then I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.